It Follows might be the most important film of the last decade, and I feel like it's time to revisit it. So I give you It Follows Revisited. It Follows stars Micah Monroe, Keir Gilchrist, and is directed by David Robert Mitchell. What's up, guys? My wife got me this for Christmas. This is the It Follows soundtrack on vinyl, and it is just like the movie. It is so intoxicating. So this is the type of movie that you can really just get lost in. And I watched it again last night, the Blu-ray here. There's just something so intoxicating about this movie. And I think what makes it so interesting to me is there are people that downright hate It Follows. And I'm not here to say they're wrong. I think that makes it kind of a special movie because it's polarizing. It's almost a love or hate type movie. But for me, it's one that I kind of became obsessed with when it came out. And it's one that I've probably watched it a good 4 times now. And it's one of those movies that I get something new from just about every time. A lot of the arguments that I hear about this movie, I think can be countered. But one thing I love about the movie is how ambiguous it is. So we're going to get into all that, and looking forward to diving deep into It Follows. Because if you remember, I reviewed the movie when it first came out. It was probably a quick little 6-minute review or something like that. And, if you watch that review, I am definitely excited. This movie really, it moved me. I can't believe it's taken me this long to come back to it and revisit it, because I definitely wanted to give it a more in-depth spoiler review. So this will be a spoiler review. If you haven't seen It Follows, you need to see this movie. I think it's very, very important. And I think it's one of the best movies of the last decade. And I mean that. So let's start with that opening scene. You have this girl, this young girl. I believe her name is Annie. And you can tell she's already in danger. Whatever it is following her. And if you take a close look at that scene, it's very different than the rest of the movie. Almost separate from the movie. And just thinking about the scene, just because of the way the cars look, it looks a little bit more updated than the rest of the movie. Which makes me think this scene might not necessarily take place before the events of the movie. This might actually take place after. That is one thing that we're going to be discussing in this review, is the timeline of this movie, how ambiguous it is. But in this opening scene, we see a girl who looks like she might have just had sex. She is wearing some seductive attire. And then, I think it's all highlighted by the way David Robert Mitchell is moving the camera. The camera definitely has like an uneasy feeling to it throughout a lot of the scenes, especially when you get like the point of view of it. And eventually we see her on the beach. She's picking up the phone and she's saying her goodbyes to her family. And she is using a cell phone too, which is another reason why this might take place after the events of the rest of the movie. But this scene, I think, like, say, Scream. Scream has a fantastic opening scene. Like Halloween has a fantastic opening scene. And you're going to hear me say Halloween quite a few times in this review, actually. And this scene, it has one of those opening scenes that really grabs you. And when we see what's left of this young girl, this is a real threat. But, after this scene, we're carried forward to what eventually is the rest of the movie. Our main character, Jay, she's getting ready for a date. And I like that scene where she's just looking in the mirror at herself, kind of taking it all in. Jay is not a bad person at all, but she is a young, promiscuous girl. It's even said in the movie that she's had a lot of, not necessarily boyfriends, but dates with different boys. So that's kind of the message of the movie. Sex, even though it's a beautiful thing, if not handled appropriately, can end up having disastrous results. And so there's a lot of symbolism in this movie. And I like that our main character isn't, like the Laurie Strode, like a good girl. Our main character is a promiscuous teenager. But she goes on this date with this guy, Jeff, and they play this game where they pick a random person, and the other person has to guess who they picked and who they would like to be like. And so really the thing starts kicking into gear when Jeff points to it, because it is following Jeff. And Jay says, "You're not pointing to anybody." And then that's when the story really starts kicking in. Every time the threat comes on screen, it is accented by music. And I don't think people realize how important the music is in this movie. It plays a pivotal role in every time the threat comes on screen.
Hello?
And it works so well because this is a movie that doesn't depend on jump scares. There aren't that many jump scares in this movie actually at all. And what I mean by that is you're scared before the punchline. Most horror movies, you know, the punchline is what makes the audience scared. But in It Follows, you don't even need the punchline. And I can dissect a few of these scenes throughout the movie that I think from a directorial standpoint are filmed brilliantly. You know, John Carpenter was one of the greatest at framing a scene, and just really scaring the audience by setting the camera still and just letting whatever's going to unfold in front of that camera unfold. And somehow it would scare the shit out of you. David Robert Mitchell really has like a toolkit of different camera techniques that he uses in this movie to not only scare the audience, but also to tell the story. And really just to take the audience off balance a bit. You're going to see a lot of like pan shots where it's just like a 360 pan. And as the camera is panning, you're going to be looking in the screen because it could be coming towards the camera. And sometimes you don't know if it is coming towards the camera, but you're always looking for something. But then we get to that scene where Jeff and Jay, they are having sex. And this is where the story really kicks into high gear. After they have sex, Jeff, he puts Jay to sleep. And then next thing you know, we see her in the wheelchair. And this scene, I remember seeing this for the first time. You know, you're wondering, okay, they're probably not going to show it. But yes, they show it. And it happens to be just a naked woman. But it's a lesson that with the right lighting, you can really make, and this isn't like a hideous looking woman. You know, this is a woman that looks like she could be in her late 30s, 40s. She's naked, but for some reason it is scary as hell. And, just something walking slowly towards the victim. It's unsettling. And again, it's all accented by Disaster Piece's score. And just a sidestep here for a sec, guys. I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way. This was one of the scariest, most frightening films I had seen in a long time. A lot of those scenes really freaked me out. They freaked the audience that I was seeing this movie with out. It's a very effective horror film. But before we see it coming towards Jay, Jeff tells Jay the rules.
It could look like someone you know, or it could be a stranger in a crowd. Whatever helps it get close to you. It can look like anyone, but there's only one of it.
That it is going to follow her no matter where she goes. It doesn't mean it can teleport or anything. It can be patient, but it's gonna get you eventually. And so that's really where like the psychological aspect of this movie comes into play, because of course Jay doesn't really believe in what Jeff is telling her. He thinks that maybe this the whole thing's a setup. Why is this woman coming after me? But Jeff tells her, you have to sleep with somebody else to pass it along. And if they kill that person, it's going to come right back to you. And I think that's where a lot of the lessons come in this movie. What you think might be the easy way to get rid of it doesn't always work out in your favor. And we see that a couple times in this movie, actually, with some of the other characters like Greg, who is this kid who's really the bad boy. He even had like a prior relationship with Jay, but Jay knows that this is the kind of guy that she should pass it on to because he's going to pass it on to somebody else, so there's really no strings attached either. But there's no responsibility, the person that they pass it on to, they're going to get killed, which happens in the movie. It goes back to Jay, and then she goes out to this boat and then passes it on again to these guys on this boat, and of course, it comes back to her again. And to me, it's just such an interesting premise that, the very thing that arguably we can say is probably one of the most pleasurable things in our lives can kill us. And it's true. It can kill us. And so I thought, it's just a very interesting theme to explore. It's not just your normal slasher movie. I consider It Follows kind of a slasher movie because it is a killer that comes after different victims throughout the movie. Some people don't consider it a slasher movie, and they might be right. It's just an interesting movie to discuss. And it's so ambiguous because, you know, there's a lot of questions that can come up. Even the last time I was watching this, there's that one scene where Jay, you know, they're in the car and they're going down the street, and then Jay looks up on her house on the roof and she sees her father naked. You know, you could have a conversation about that scene, like, does this mean that Jay's father actually molested her? It could happen. I like that this movie presents those questions, but it doesn't necessarily answer them. I don't think you always have to put the answer out there for the audience. It kind of goes back to Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. It's never really said if he molested children or if he didn't. It does in the remake. But yeah, this is, I love ambiguous horror movies. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I know some people like horror movies that pretty much spell everything out for them. I know some of the problems people had with this movie is they thought it was either A, boring, or it was B, just confusing. But really, if you think about it, you can kind of form your own conclusions to it. Doesn't necessarily mean you're 100% correct, but you know, there's a lot to discuss about It Follows. Now, I mentioned Halloween and John Carpenter. This movie almost feels like a love letter to Halloween, but in the best way. You know, it doesn't like copy Halloween or anything, but you can really see the respect for Halloween, all the way to like Jay and her sister taking a walk in the neighborhood, and it's framed just like when we see Laurie and Annie and Linda walking. There's also the scene where they go to this like abandoned house where they find that picture of Jeff, and the music cue in that scene sounds very similar to Laurie's theme. You know, I picked up on a lot of that stuff. I watched it on a really good sound system this time around, and I just picked up on a lot of like musical cues that sounded very similar to Halloween. But just, you know, just some small ones. For the most part, though, this definitely has its own score. And the score in this movie by Disaster Piece is one of the greatest parts about the movie. It's just so memorable.
Roll it towards some overwhelming question to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all.
The score itself kind of makes you guess what timeline It Follows is in. The only thing you have is this one character, Donna, holding this, what looks like a makeup mirror, but it actually is like a little computer. But outside of that, you have TVs that are from like the 1970s and 80s. You have furniture that looks like it's from the 70s. You have pictures on the wall that are black and white. You know, the timeline is all over the place in It Follows, and that is completely intentional. You know, I see what David Robert Mitchell was trying to do. And in the long run, 20, 30 years from now, It Follows is going to stand out because of that fact, because it doesn't set itself in one particular timeline. And I think that works. I think that is genius, actually. And I'll even go ahead and say, shout out to Wolf Myers. He posted something on Killer Flicks, like every 18 years, a major horror film is released. You know, 1960, Psycho, 1978, Halloween, 1996, Scream. And he mentioned 2014, It Follows. And, you know, he got a lot of flack for saying that, but I really think that people are going to be talking about It Follows even 10 years from now. It's just a movie that draws debate. And you could even argue that when Halloween was first released, it was panned by critics. It took a while for Halloween to become a big hit. It didn't have its fans at first, but it became this word-of-mouth hit. People kept talking about the movie, and they couldn't deny the horror aspect of it and how chilling it was and how you know, expertly directed it was. And I can see that happening with It Follows. You know, only time will tell. But just to jump back into the core scare scenes, one that I have to talk about is that scene where Jay, you know, she is at home. This is after the events of the parking garage, and she's really freaked out and crying. And so Paul, played by Keir Gilchrist, he is comforting her. He's sitting on the couch with her. And this is a nice little scene to kind of build the characters a bit. And then when Paul goes into the kitchen, you think nothing's wrong. But then as soon as Jay goes into that kitchen, then the scene really kicks into slow motion. and the music kicks in, and then you see this, again, it's a woman with a breast exposed. You know, that's another hint that, you know, sex will kill you. And she's urinating on herself. And it's a scene that really just makes you feel so uncomfortable. And again, these are scenes that I had never seen as far as like scary scenes in a horror movie before. Kind of reminded me a little bit of what was done in The Shining. You know, The Shining has some really uncomfortable scenes. And I think horror scenes that are uncomfortable are probably my favorite as far as like scare scenes go. Now, the final act in It Follows, I think, is what gets the most controversy. You know, and endings are hard, you know, and I think a lot of people, they want a certain type of ending. And for a movie like this, it's hard to determine where this thing's going to go. And so, you know, they set up this trap, you know, at this pool, and they really want to just electrocute it. And honestly, I loved that scene, actually. I loved how it was filmed, you know, and you have it like throwing typewriters and toasters and all kinds of shit at Jay. And I think it was just directed brilliantly because every time, like, you know, a typewriter would come at her, it felt like it was hitting you. But this just leads to an ambiguous ending, much like the first Halloween. You know, you think that they kill it, but you're not 100% sure, which is kind of like what evil is. You know, evil never dies. Michael Myers got up and he left, and then that was the end of the movie. And so after this scene, we're kind of left with an open ending. Jay has sex with Paul, and they think everything's safe. But then the psychological aspect kicks in, and Paul is uncertain about what's going on, so he actually goes and tries to pass it on to a prostitute just in case, just to be safe. But you never know, you know? So they definitely left it open for a sequel if they ever wanted to make one. You know, the last scene we see is Paul and Jay, and they're just walking down the street, and then the credits roll. And it's a good scene because it gives kind of a sense of hope, you know? They're actually going to have like a committed relationship, and maybe that's the point of It Follows, is that maybe you should strive for a good relationship instead of a promiscuous relationship. So there is that sense of hope there, but it is still always out there. So guys, It Follows, yeah, it's a trap on a freaking island. Like I said, it's one of the most important horror films, I think, of the last decade. And it just gets better every time I watch it. You know, I love horror movies that make you think, and this one definitely makes you think. Even if you don't like this movie, you got to admit that it does make you think. It's a movie that lets you form your own conclusions, even lets you like put yourself in these situations. So guys, that is my It Follows Revisited special. Post in the comments your thoughts on It Follows. Looking forward to hearing them. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays we do Free For All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Drumdum out.